8. The LNAt and other law tests. Dear Alex, as a follow-up to my last letter, I thought I'd send you one about the various legal aptitude tests that you might have to sit if and when you apply to do law at university. The principal such test is the LNAt, the National Admissions Test for Law, which you will have to take if you are applying to any of the following universities: Birmingham, Bristol, Durham, Glasgow, King's College London, Nottingham, Oxford, and University College London. Though check on the LNAT site www.LNAT.uk what the current position is, the list of universities that require and do not require you to have done the LNAT changes over time. Applicants to Cambridge aren't required to do the LNAT, but will on coming up to interview instead have to sit the Cambridge Law Test. I'll talk about both tests in this letter. The LNAT. If you're going to be taking the LNAT, you should definitely have a look at the LNAT website at www.LNAT.uk. The website provides a lot of helpful information, as well as a couple of practice papers. As you'll see from the website, the point of the LNAT is to test students' aptitude to study law. Now, this doesn't mean that if you do badly on the LNAT, no one will accept you for a place to study law. Your performance on the LNAT is only one of the things that admissions tutors at the above universities will take into account in deciding whether or not to offer you a place. By the same token, if you do really well on the LNAT, that does not necessarily mean you are guaranteed a place to study law at whatever universities you are applying to. Having said that, a poor performance on the LNAT won't help your case for admission to a place at university to study law. And a good performance could catch the selector's eye and win you a place that you might not have obtained otherwise. So if you are applying to a university that requires you to take the LNAT, it is important that you do as well as you can on it, and to do well, you have to prepare for it. The LNAT is made up of two parts. There is a multiple choice section where you are given a passage to read and asked 2 or 3 multiple choice questions about that passage. For example, what point has not been made so far in Nick's letter to Alex about the LNAT? A. The LNAT test is very difficult. B. Some universities require law applicants to take the LNAT. C. Admissions tutors take the LNAT results into account in making admissions decisions. D. The official website about the LNAT is very helpful. E. It is important to prepare for the LNAT if you are applying to do law at one of the universities that require their applicants to have done the LNAT. The answer is, of course, I haven't said anything so far about how difficult the LNAT is. You will be asked questions on 12 different passages. The total number of multiple choice questions you will be asked to answer is 36, and you will have 95 minutes to answer them. This doesn't sound like very much time. However, it should in fact be ample. The second part of the LNAT is an essay section. You will be required to write one essay in 40 minutes. You will be given the choice of 3 different topics or quotes to write about. For example, 1. Many people argue that admissions tests to gain places at university discriminate against students who are educationally disadvantaged. Others argue that such tests help such students by detecting in them abilities that would otherwise go unnoticed. Which side do you agree with? 2. Efforts to protect the environment are misplaced. Why should we care about preserving the world for generations that are as yet unborn? Discuss. 3. Driving different countries into a political union is simply a recipe for trouble. Do you agree? The LNAT website says that your essay should be about 500-600 words, and not more than 750 words. Unlike the multiple choice section of the LNAT, your essay will not be marked centrally by the people who run the LNAT. Instead, it will be forwarded to the admissions tutors at any universities to which you are applying that require their applicants to do the LNAT. It will then be up to those admissions tutors to assess the quality of your essay. If you are going to do the LNAT, you should have a look at the preparation section of the LNAT website, which contains a hints and tips section. The multiple choice section of the LNAT has a great deal in common with critical thinking tests, So in theory, it might be worth having a look at some books on critical thinking as preparation for the LNAt. However, in practice, I'm not that impressed by the books on critical thinking that I've seen, so I can't recommend a specific book for you to read. But have a look in the bookshops yourself. And if there is a book on critical thinking that appeals to you, then use that. There are some books that have been specifically written to advise people on how to do well on the LNAt. Passing the National Admissions Test for Law LNAt by Rosalie Hutton, Glenn Hutton and Fraser Sampson, published by Learning Matters, and Practice and Pass. LNAt by Georgina Petrova and Christopher Reed, published by Trotman. You can also download a preparation guide from the LNAt website for free. I'll now get on with giving you some advice on doing the LNAt. Very strong disclaimer at this point. My publisher owns the company Pearson VUE that currently runs the LNAt test. However, what follows definitely does not at all represent any inside knowledge on my part on how to do well on the LNAt. These are my views, not anyone else's. The multiple choice section. 1. Be careful. That's my main piece of advice to you. Be careful in reading and answering the questions. For example, suppose you are asked, which of the following is an unstated assumption that the writer makes in the passage? When you are going through the possible answers supplied, remember that you are not just looking for an answer that identifies an assumption that the writer has made in making out his argument in the passage supplied. You are looking for an answer that identifies an assumption that the writer has made in making out his argument in the passage supplied that is also not stated in the passage supplied. So don't mark as correct an answer that identifies an assumption that the writer has expressly said that he is making in the passage supplied. That statement may represent an assumption that the writer made in making out his argument, but it's hardly unstated, is it? 2. If you don't know the answer, you might as well guess. In its present form, wrong answers in the multiple choice section of the LNAt are not given a negative mark. So if you do not know the answer to a given question, you might as well guess the answer. You won't be punished if your answer is wrong, and you might well be lucky and guess the right answer. The admissions tutors at the universities you are applying to will not see your answers to the multiple choice questions. All they will see is your total mark. So if your guess is wildly wrong, you won't be punished for that. No one will see your answers and think, well, this candidate can't be very good if he or she thought that that was the right answer. Now, if you come across a question in the LNAt that completely stumps you, don't spend too long agonizing over it. You can always go back to it if you finish the rest of the multiple choice section before the allotted 95 minutes are up. It's more important you move on to the other questions, which you will probably have a better chance of knowing the answer to. So make your best guess as to what the answer is, and then swiftly move on. Once you have finished going through the whole of the multiple choice section, then you can go back to the questions that you had real problems with and agonize over what the answers to those questions are. 3. Getting through the test in time. You will have to decide for yourself by doing practice tests, such as the ones on the LNAt website or in the available books about the LNAt, what sort of approach to the multiple choice questions will best allow you to get through the multiple choice section of the LNAt in the time allowed. Most people seem to adopt the following approach to answering multiple choice questions on a given passage in the LNAt. They first of all read the passage carefully. They then look at the questions, and they then refer back to the passage to help them select the correct answers to those questions. You might want to think about adopting a different approach. This is to look at the questions first, and then search the passage for the answers. This seems to me a great time saver if you get a question like, what is the main point that the writer is making in the last paragraph? To answer that question, you don't have to have read the whole of the passage supplied. You simply have to look at the last paragraph of the passage. Similarly, if you get a question like, which of the following is not a reason why the writer refers to the 1990s as the golden age of television? Again, you don't have to have read the whole of the passage to answer that question. Just look in the passage for the phrase, the golden age of television, and then look around that phrase for the reasons why the writer thinks that the 1990s were the golden age of television. And if you get a question asking, which of the following is not a statement of opinion? Or, which of the following is a statement of opinion? Well, you don't need to have read the passage at all to answer that one. I think this approach to doing the multiple choice section of the LNAt is a lot faster and allows you to spend much more time on the really tricky questions. But you will have to find out for yourself whether this approach works for you or whether you are more comfortable adopting the more conventional approach to going through the multiple choice section. 4. The importance of practice. It is important to give yourself the best possible chance of doing well in the multiple choice section of the LNAt to do the practice tests on the LNAt website. This will get you used to the sort of questions that you might be asked in this section of the LNAt, and also the kind of tricks the question setters get up to in an attempt to find out how good your legal abilities really are. The essay section. 1. Selecting your essay title. Be careful in choosing what essay to do in the essay section of the LNAt. Make sure that the essay title you pick allows you to write an interesting and effective essay that will impress an admissions tutor reading it. So pick an essay title that allows you to make some strong arguments, or even better, an essay title that allows you to make an unexpected or surprising point. For example, in the year the LNAt was introduced, students were required to write an essay on one of the following 5 topics. 1. Sporting achievement should not be limited by the prohibition on the use of certain performance-enhancing drugs. Do you agree? 2. What is your response to the view that the purpose of education is to prepare young people for the world of work? 3. Women now have the chance to achieve anything they want. How do you respond to this statement? 4. Modern society is too dependent on debt. We should all pay our way. Do you agree? 5. Would you agree that travel and tourism exploit poorer nations and benefit only the richer ones? Nowadays, each student is given a choice of 3 essay questions that have been selected from a bank of possible essay questions. So different students will be given a different set of 3 essays to choose from. Now, which of these essays would a good student do? Well, a good student would rule out doing 4 straight away. Why? Well, the statement is so silly that there's no possibility of agreeing with it. And any arguments that one might make against the statement are just so obvious without incurring debts. People couldn't afford to buy homes and cars. Companies could not survive through lean times. The government would collapse that an essay arguing that the statement is wrong wouldn't make for particularly interesting reading. A good student would also rule out doing 5. This is partly because, again, the basis of the essay question is a statement: travel and tourism exploit poorer nations and benefit only the richer ones, that is so silly that one cannot do anything but disagree with it. So the scope for saying anything interesting in response to the essay title is virtually nil. In addition, to write an effective essay on this title would seem to require a good grasp of the economic data on tourism, and not many students will have that sort of information to hand. For similar reasons, a good student would also rule out doing essay 3. The statement seems obviously wrong. A woman with a baby might want to be paid £50,000 a year for working 1 day a week in a law firm, thus allowing her to spend most of her time raising her baby. But it can hardly be supposed that any woman or man would be allowed to do that. However, an essay that made that point would not be particularly interesting. It might be possible to narrow the statement in some way so as to make it more plausible. One could interpret it as saying that women now have the chance to do any kind of work they want. But again, it's hard to see how one could write an interesting essay on that topic. Either the available information indicates that women have that chance, or it indicates that they do not. There does not seem to be much room for interesting debate or discussion. Either way, our good student is running out of options. What about 2? Well, there is no way any student applying to study at a university will want to be caught agreeing with the idea that education is simply about preparing young people to do a job. So a student who did essay 2 would have to argue that the purpose of education is more wide-ranging. Could a student write an interesting essay that took that kind of line? It depends on whether he or she could come up with an interesting and convincing line as to what the purpose of education is if it's not to prepare young people for work. Merely saying that the purpose of education is to cultivate one's mind, or to expand one's horizons, or make one question everything, wouldn't be enough. Saying that is just not very interesting. One interesting line, which would link in quite well with the statement in the essay title, would be to argue that the purpose of education is not to prepare young people for work, but to prepare them for leisure. You could argue that the purpose of education is to prepare young people for what they should be doing in their leisure time. And one could move from there to say that it's noticeable that as education has become more work-oriented, the way young people spend their leisure time has increasingly become a social problem. Examples: binge drinking, bored youths hanging around estates joyriding. You could then say that this makes it all the more necessary that we move back towards a notion of education as preparing young people for how they spend their leisure. That would make for quite an interesting essay on too, that would impress any admissions tutor who read it. And note that while an essay that took this kind of line might refer to some features of contemporary life to make its points doing, this essay would not require the sort of in-depth knowledge of the real world that one would have to have if one attempted essays 3 or 5. Finally, what about 1? Again, there seems to be some scope for writing an interesting and effective essay on this topic. It's not so obvious that using performance-enhancing drugs in sport should be banned that it's impossible to think of interesting arguments on either side of the issue. For example, one could observe if one wanted to argue in favor of allowing the use of performance-enhancing drugs that athletes already use dietary supplements to help them train. So why not allow them to use steroids to build up their stamina and help them train longer? Against this, one could argue that steroids are bad for you, and athletes who do not want to endanger their health by using steroids should not be disadvantaged when competing against other athletes. There is scope here for getting an interesting debate going, which is simply not possible with essay 4. And there is no need to have access to very specialized knowledge to engage in that debate, something which, as we've seen, is not possible with essays 3 or 5. The debate is at the level of general principle rather than hard fact. So of these 5 essays, a good student would do essays 1 or 2. He or she would definitely not do essays 3, 4, or 5. So if you do the LNAt, be careful about your choice of essay. Make sure you go through the same kind of process that I've gone through above. Discard the essay titles, which however doable they might seem offer little prospect of allowing you to write an interesting and effective essay. 2. Essay structure. Suppose you have been told to write an essay on, is X true? You have probably been taught to write an essay on this topic using the following structure. Introduction. Arguments for thinking that X is true. Arguments for thinking that X is not true. Your opinion on whether X is true, given the balance of the arguments. Conclusion. Please don't adopt this kind of structure in writing your LNAt essay. I'll say it again, just in case the message hasn't got through. Please don't adopt this kind of structure in writing your LNAt essay. In fact, once you leave school, please don't ever write an essay along these lines ever again. Nothing is more guaranteed to send an admissions tutor to sleep than an essay that goes. On the one hand, it could be argued that on the other hand, it could be argued that on balance, I think that so we can conclude that if you want to impress an admissions tutor who is reading your essay, and remember he or she will probably have a large pile of these essays to wade through, so you will want to do something to catch his or her eye, you will have to adopt a quite different approach. I'd like to encourage you to adopt this structure in writing your LNAt essay. Conclusion. Arguments in favor of your conclusion. Arguments against your conclusion. And an explanation as to why they do not work. Restatement of your conclusion. This is a much more direct way of writing your essay. There are 3 big advantages to writing your essay in this way. First, your essay will be very easy to follow and understand by stating at the start where you stand. You make it obvious where you are coming from. Secondly, your essay will be much more interesting than an essay written in the more careful, plotting style you have probably been brought up to use. Thirdly, your essay will be a lot less wordy, a big advantage, when you only have 500, 600 words to play with. Of course, you can only employ this kind of essay structure if you know before you begin what your conclusion is going to be. So take some time before you start writing the essay to think it out, and think about what sort of line you are going to take in the essay. 3. Preparation. It might be an idea to try a few practice essay questions to get used to this different style of writing essays that I'm encouraging you to adopt. There are also some model essays on the LNAt website, which it might be an idea to look at. But they are so ridiculously good, I think reading them might intimidate the hell out of you. Read them anyway, but in the knowledge that they are absurdly good, and no student would be expected to write anything that elegant. Incidentally, those model essays adopt a different structure from the one I recommend above. Their structure goes: 1. Clarification or rephrasing of the issues raised by the question. 2. Discussion of those issues. 3. Conclusions. Another thing you should do by way of preparation for the essay section of the LNAt is to start reading in full a serious daily newspaper such as The Times, The Daily Telegraph, The Independent, or The Guardian. Pay particular attention to the opinion comment sections of the newspapers. It might be an idea to try to read the opinion comment sections of both The Daily Telegraph and The Guardian each day, so that you are exposed to a variety of points of view. Also try, if you can, to read The Spectator or The New Statesman or The Economist every week. Doing this will be of huge benefit to you in doing the essay section of the LNAt. First, reading serious newspapers and magazines will boost your knowledge of current affairs, and therefore your ability to handle an essay question on current affairs. Secondly, doing this kind of reading will expose you to political ideas and discussions that you can then draw on in writing your essay. Thirdly, reading these kinds of newspapers and magazines will expose you to some good, serious debates on difficult issues, thus helping you see the sort of thing that you'll be expected to do in your essay. The Cambridge Law Test. That's all I want to say about the LNAt. I'll briefly say a few things about the Cambridge Law Test CLT. This is an aptitude test for legal ability that students applying to study law at Cambridge have to do. So if you are applying to Cambridge and one or more universities that make their applicants do the LNAt, you'll end up doing both legal aptitude tests. Full details about the CLT can be found on the Cambridge Law Faculty's website at http://www.cambridge Law Test PHP. The test, which is sat when applicants come up to Cambridge for interview, will consist of an essay question, or a comprehension question, or a problem question. The colleges are given varieties of each type of question to pick from, and it is up to them to determine which particular question their applicants will be asked to sit. So the CLT that law applicants to, say, Trinity College sit might be very different from the version of the CLT that applicants to my college would be made to sit, if an applicant is required, under the version of the CLT that he or she has been supplied with, to do an essay question. He or she will be given a choice of 3 essay questions to do, and asked to do one essay just like on the LNAt. And the guidance supplied above on writing essays for the LNAt equally applies to writing an essay for the CLT. If an applicant is set a comprehension question for the CLT, that will usually take the form of a legal judgment or a couple of judgments, and the applicant will usually be asked to summarize the judgments in his or her own words and comment on the judgments. I have to say that students nowadays are pretty bad at writing summaries. Either they find it impossible to focus on the key ideas set out in the judgments, or they introduce irrelevant material speculating on what the judge really thought or why the judge decided the case the way he or she did. The only way to improve your abilities at doing this kind of question is practice. Take any fairly lengthy story or comment piece from a newspaper or magazine and try to sum it up in not more than 100 words. This is known as a praxis exercise, the sort of thing that used to be standard in schools, but is never done anymore. If you have a friend who's interested in doing the same thing, both of you should independently try to summarize the same story or article, then exchange your summaries and see whether you have both focused on the same key points. If you haven't, discuss whose summary was more precise. If you are asked to comment on a particular judgment, or asked what sort of judgment you would have given, Take a clear line and come up with some clear arguments in favor of your position. If you have 3 arguments in favor of your position, then number them or give each of them a name to make the distinctions between them clear. Obscurity is the enemy, and you will be punished severely for fraternizing with it. You must make what you are saying as clear as possible. A CLT problem question will usually take the form of a set of rules drawn from a statute, and you will be asked to discuss how those rules apply to some concrete situations. The key to success in doing these sorts of questions is be precise in applying the rules. Every term in the rule might be relevant to how that rule applies in a situation that you are considering, so pay attention to every term and what implications it might have for the situation you are considering. You have to be accurate. Close is nowhere. Again, if you have a friend and both of you are applying to study law at Cambridge, you could both try the practice question on the Cambridge faculty website and compare your answers and discuss any differences between them. That's enough guidance from me. Good luck with all your applications and any tests you might have to do. Let me know how you get on. Best wishes. Nick.